And now we're seeing it across the street at the
And last night in the hydrants, I was trying to firefight.
Today I wanted to talk about why California consistently has some of the worst fires year after year and why they seem to get worse every single year. I'm going to talk about the climate, ecosystem, natural and urban geography, and politics, all of which are causing these fires to get worse and all of which have a huge impact on the nature of fires in the state of California. So let's get into it. First, I would like to clarify, California is absolutely not the only place in the world with these devastating fires. You may remember the Australian wildfires or the Canadian wildfires that got so bad the smoke traveled across the United States and made New York look like something out of Blade Runner 2047. There's also been devastating fires in Greece, Portugal, much of Europe, and basically the entire world. What separates California, though, is that many of these fires aren't burning in remote or isolated forest areas. They're burning right on the borders of cities with millions, if not tens of millions of people. And these fires can cost billions and billions of dollars of damages. This was the case in the recent LA fires, where we had fires break out just miles from downtown LA, which is an urban area that has over 18 million people. So how, why, and what are really causing all these incredibly huge fires? First culprit is climate, and I'm not talking about climate change, although that is important too. But specifically the climate in California, which allows for the perfect conditions for fires to begin and to foster. Contrary to popular belief, most of California is not a desert. And this is important to talk about because deserts seemingly have the perfect climate for fires. They're dry, they don't have a lot of rain, they're extremely hot, and yet we don't hear about huge fires breaking out in Saudi Arabia, right? I know what you're probably thinking. Yeah, well that's because Saudi Arabia looks like this, idiot. Exactly. Deserts aren't great for fires because they simply do not have enough fuel to actually fuel the fire. On the contrary, places like rainforests are also not great places for fires to break out. I mean, seems pretty obvious. The trees, everything, it's just a little too wet. It rains super often. And while there are large fires in places like the Amazon and Borneo, most of these fires break out in areas that have been cleared by loggers and break out because loggers are intentionally lighting the forest up in order to clear it. Fires don't do too great in super dry areas like deserts or in super wet areas like a rainforest. So what's in between? A Mediterranean climate. And this is exactly what California has. Mediterranean climates can be found in, well, the Mediterranean. I think you could have guessed that. Also places like Western Australia, South Africa, Chile, and a couple other places, of which coincidentally, or maybe not so much, all of them are known for having horrible fires. This is because Mediterranean climates are warmer and drier and without rain for most of the year except in winter, yet they get just enough rain for large amounts of dried bush and some trees to grow, which is perfect for fires. This means these climates are absolutely the worst of both worlds when it comes to fires. And instead of just telling you about these Mediterranean climates, I live in California, so why don't I just go show you what I'm talking about? So here I am in the hills of Riverside, which is considered a Mediterranean climate, and we have thousands of homes over here, and then right next to all those homes we have mountains and hills filled with brush. All over. You might be able to understand why bushes like this might be a little bit flammable. Here I am at another area of brush, and in the presence of fire, this area would light up in seconds. We have so much brush here in Riverside that we have wild donkeys that eat this stuff year round. And it stays like this, super dry, except for a couple weeks in winter when the first rains arrive. And then in a matter of days, this entire mountain will turn green. So much so that my school that I go to, UC Riverside, our mascot is actually the Highlanders because these hills resemble the hills of Scotland or Ireland. And it's no joke, they get very green. But other than that, these hills are full of this dangerous, highly flammable brush. And for proof of what I'm talking about, here's a map of wildfires in Europe in 2023, and what do you notice? These fires aren't taking place in the super forested and very green places like Scandinavia. Instead, almost all the major fires are taking place in the Mediterranean, in North Africa, Spain, southern Italy, and especially places like Greece. And it's not just the climate. Fires are responsible for a huge amount of important things when it comes to the ecosystem, including seed germination, plant biodiversity, continued growth of the forests overall. Although this seems kind of ridiculous, it's absolutely true. And you know who knew this? The Native Americans. They used controlled burns to do plenty of different things, including opening up areas to farm and increasing diversity when it came to the forests so they could have access to different plants and resources and whatnot. So the more I look into fires in California, one thing seems to become clear. Fires aren't the problem. They've always been here in this state, and they're going to continue in this state for probably the rest of time. They've been burning for so long that the entire ecosystem has adapted to deal with them and adapted to live with them. So the problem isn't fire, but rather it's humans. It's where we've decided to live, it's how we've decided to treat the climate, and our decisions when it comes to trying to stop fires. Let me explain. California has a huge population, the most of any state by quite a large margin, but this makes sense, right? Look how big the state is. But the population is not separated and divided equally across the state. It's incredibly lopsided. Like, for example, let's take a look at Florida, which has a pretty equal distribution of population. There's parts of the north that are underpopulated and whatnot. But when we take a look at California, there is only really 3 places where almost the entire population of the state lives. You have the small area in and around the bay from the northern counties, Napa, Sonoma, down to Monterey Bay, which has around 8 million people. You have the Central Valley, of which even large parts of the Central Valley are underpopulated, and all in all, the Central Valley has around 7 million people. And finally, you have Southern California. And not this whole area, just the smaller area south of the San Gabriel Mountains, out into Riverside and San Bernardino counties, all the way to the oceans and down to San Diego below. 22 million people live in Southern California. So what you can see is that the population of California is incredibly packed in. You have places of huge and dense population, and then you have places that are almost remote. And altogether, these 3 areas hold about 95% of the population of the entire state. So what the hell does all of this have to do with fire? Well, first off, what do you notice about every single one of these population zones? One of the major things you might notice is that they're all surrounded by mountains and hills. And what do these mountains and hills have? Dry, flammable brush. This might seem kind of obvious considering how mountainous California is in the first place, but it's very important when we take a look at the fire risk here in California. Let's compare this to Chicago or cities in Texas like Dallas, where surrounding the city you have either giant lakes or usually farmland, but not in California. Yes, Long Beach, for example, doesn't have mountains, but north of LA, just a couple miles, you have the huge San Gabriel Mountains, which are covered by miles and miles of flammable brush. And it's not just these mountains. You have the Santa Monica Mountains, you have the Santa Ana Mountains, which pass through Orange County, and more. And it's not just LA. Look at our state's capital, Sacramento. In Sacramento, you have urban sprawl that grows all the way up until the foothills of the massive Sierra Nevada mountains. In San Francisco, we don't have giant mountains, but we have hills that cover the entire region from the north, south, east, and west. The existence of these mountains and hills is one of the major reasons why we have such destructive fires in California, especially urban fires. Urban sprawl in California is so bad that it has extended into the path of these fires, allowing for such destruction to take place, as you can imagine. And if we look at almost all of the most destructive fires in the history of California, where do they take place? Right along these areas bordering these mountains and hills. For example, the 2017 Tubbs Fire, which burnt all the way through the hills and mountains of Napa and Sonoma County north of San Francisco. The 2018 Camp Fire, which is the deadliest fire in California history, which burnt the entire city of Paradise to the ground. This started and burned through the foothills of the Sierra Nevada range. And then you also have the 1991 Oakland Fire, which burned in the hills east of Oakland. And of course the recent Eaton and Palisades fires, which both burnt through hills and mountains nearby. It also doesn't help that these mountains allow and stir up enormous winds, such as the Santa Ana winds, which are something that hit the LA region every single year and can cause hurricane speed winds and allow for such scenes as this to take place. So as you can see, these mountainous and hilly regions with all of this dry brush are where almost all of these recent fires have taken place. And beyond just building in areas where there's fires, humans are the cause of almost all of these large fires. For example, the Tubbs and Camp Fire were both caused by the electrical grid, and many others have been caused by arson or other things like cigarettes. So while California is built to withstand fires, not at this rate, because almost all of them are being caused by human activity. And this is not even to talk about human-induced climate change, which is causing the environment to get warmer, and a ton of other problems. I mean, you want some evidence? Look at the most destructive fires in California history. Almost all of them have been in the past 10 or 20 years. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. They are becoming more and more common, and they're getting worse every single year. So let's do a little recap. California is a state that is ecologically and climatically prone to fires. So much so that the ecosystem of California has adapted to live with these fires. This is all made worse by the fact that people in California have settled in the most fire-prone areas along mountains and hills and all of this. And all of this is combined with the fact that many, if not the vast majority of these fires, are started by one form of human activity or another. So what in the hell can be done about all of this? Is there anything that can be done? Or are fires simply a fact of life in California now? Well, there is a couple things that can be done, and one of the major things that we should be doing is following in the ways of Native Americans and practicing controlled burns here in the state. Controlled burns are highly effective, and essentially what they're used for is to burn areas of high risk that might cause damage to houses or forest areas, whatever the case might be. And instead of burning down those houses, we burn down the brush before the fire ever gets a chance to light it up. And so in general, this is a very effective method of preventing fires and stopping the spread of fires especially. And clearing this brush and doing controlled burns is proven to work. Some studies from Columbia and other schools have shown that controlled burns can prevent fires by up to 60%. So why aren't we doing it more? Well, the state is trying. They have a goal to do about 400 acres of controlled burns every year, but they don't come nearly close ever. Why? Well, the funding is simply not there. 2023, they didn't even get to 100,000 acres burned, and in the fall of 2024, controlled burns were stopped entirely because it was just too risky. It was too dry, and officials said that these fires could start new fires and go out of control. The fact is right now, we're not investing enough, and we can see the results. And it's not just controlled burns, there's a lot of other things that we can do. For example, rebuilding the electrical grid. As I've already mentioned, a lot of fires are caused by power lines or whatever, starting sparks and lighting up entire areas. One thing that could be done is putting the electrical grid underground, but as you know, this is extremely expensive. Is it really that expensive when the damages are triple, quadruple, if not more in terms of expenses? So this is something that we should be doing, especially in fire-prone areas. Not only that, we need to make sure that areas that are prone to fires have water availability. And we should also probably not be cutting the fire department's budget as fires get worse year after year, as Mayor Bass of Los Angeles has recently done. The simple fact right now is we're not doing enough, and it doesn't seem to make sense. The damages year after year are unbelievably high, and certainly cost more than what it would take to try and prevent these fires. So can these fires ever be fully prevented? And the answer is obviously no. This is just a fact of life in California, and these fires have been burning for millions of years here in California. But that doesn't mean we can't try and reduce the risk in these very risky areas, and that in general we can't be more prepared. We have to be more prepared. We should be doing more. We should be funding bush clearances more and more, sending more to local fire departments, investing more in new equipment. Fires are inevitable here in California. There's no changing that. But incredibly destructive fires year after year in the state don't have to be this way, at least not to the same level. We need to take steps to try and prevent them, or at least prepare for them, or things are going to get much worse in the coming years as climate change continues to run its course. So that's been my video. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.